Welcome to Trashmagination, a podcast about reimagining trash. I'm Carla Brown. This week's episode is about creatively reusing glass bottles and jars. This topic was requested by my friend Alexis, who also inspired the episode on creative reuse of worn out or mismatched socks. You can inspire a future podcast episode by sending any of your creative reuse questions or observations to trashmagination@gmail.com. Alexis said that she had some especially beautiful glass bottles and jars, and she felt they were too beautiful to be put in the recycling bin. She had already made a beautiful centerpiece by filling a bottle with LED lights. Her husband had figured out a way to drill a hole in the base of the bottle to string in the lights. Now, I had never spent a lot of time thinking about glass jars and bottles because I know there are good markets for recycled glass. I wanted to focus my attention on items that would definitely go to landfill. However, it is better for the environment if we reuse jars than to recycle them. It takes a lot of energy to pulverize and reconstitute the glass, let alone transporting the heavy glass from place to place. Plus, I learned so many amazing ways to reuse glass bottles and jars while researching this episode. I'm so glad that I researched it, and I can't wait to start really focusing on buying things in glass rather than plastic. Now, I recently saw a video of a machine that can pulverize a glass bottle and make it into sand in only a few seconds. This sand can be used in industrial processes instead of harvesting sand from the environment. And there is a golf course in Laguna Beach which replenishes their bunkers with sand made from pulverized glass bottles. And while the video makes it look really cool to see the glass pulverize instantly, I am sure that we can find better ways to creatively reuse this material. When I was growing up, we used to go to a place called the Pop Shop, and I would be allowed to choose one bottle of soda for my family's six-pack, and then we would return the bottles every week. Nowadays, my family purchases our milk in reusable bottles, and then we give it back to the farmer to be reused over and over. In Europe, there are better systems for recovering glass bottles and jars and reusing them for the same purpose until they are too scratched up or chipped. We don't have those systems in the United States, and we really need to improve it. So today, we're going to talk about ways to creatively reuse glass bottles and jars that don't require you to change the bottles and jars in any way. Then we'll talk about projects that involve painting them, and then we'll talk about projects that involve cutting or melting the jars. And then I'm going to talk about artists near you who would love to receive your beautiful glass bottles and jars if you don't want to have them in your home anymore. And finally, I'm going to talk about something really fun, which is called bottle houses. Now, if you're going to reuse your bottles and jars, the first step is to clean them, of course. And this is true whether you're going to reuse them or recycle them. It can be tricky to get the labels off the jars. Of course, I scrub, and usually they come off pretty easily. But if you have a whole bunch of jars with a whole bunch of labels and it's very stubborn, I'm going to link to a tutorial in the show notes that shows you how to take them off more easily. Once your glass bottles and jars are clean, it's time to start reusing them. Now, I have so many zero waste goals related to glass bottles and jars. When you watch videos about people who are living a zero waste lifestyle, you will always see that they have a whole bunch of food and bathroom items stored in glass jars. After I watched those videos, my eyes were suddenly looking at all the plastic around my house, and I was starting to imagine how I could replace each one with a glass container. My family made the shift to glass containers to store leftovers many years ago, and it has been a great decision, so I know we can do it. Now, for inspiration, I will share 2 videos of people who are giving their home tours. These are zero waste families. The first one is in Tasmania, and the family is Oberon and Laura Carter. They open up all their cupboards and they show you inside, and you can see how it's a very feasible way to live. And then I will also share a video by zero waste author Aline Gubri, where she's giving her house tour. It's more like an apartment tour. And something that's fun about her tour is that the tour is in French, and it's so much fun because you can learn all the vocabulary for zero waste in French. And I learned, for example, that the word for zero waste is zéro déchet. I think it's really helpful to learn how to say words and phrases like zero waste or creative reuse in other languages. So when you're searching for cool videos and tutorials, you can find them in other languages as well. I would love it if you would send me the words for creative reuse or zero waste or trashmagination in any language that you speak. You can email that to me at trashmagination@gmail.com, or you can message me via social media. And I talked about some words a few episodes ago about taiko in creative reuse, like I talked about the word mottainai, which means what a waste in Japanese, or sodai gomi, which means like big waste. Now, inspired by these zero waste videos, one of my goals is to make my own toothpaste and to store it in a glass jar. And it's actually really not that tricky. I got the bentonite clay at Whole Foods, and unfortunately that clay was in a plastic container. But hopefully these things will slowly start being brought in glass containers so that we're not buying plastic in order to avoid plastic. But it will be a more reusable container than a toothpaste tube, for example. Now, I hope to stop buying hand soap and mouthwash in plastic containers. My plan is to get the metal squirty attachment part and put it in a refillable glass bottle. And again, there are lots of recipes online to make those ingredients where the raw ingredients come in cardboard boxes or other things than plastic, and then you don't have to buy a plastic container. Now, I had a concern about putting glass containers in the bathroom that my kids use because I was worried about them knocking the jar on the floor. And this is a consideration for families with small children or just clumsy people like myself. Now, I saw a few projects that address that problem. For example, there's one where you clamp the glass jars to a piece of wood on the wall using something called a hose clamp. And then another project where you make kind of a square wooden box that holds 4 jars. And I think this would be a great way to ensure that you can still use glass containers even if you're worried about knocking them over. Mason jars are super popular right now, and that means that there are lots of products to make mason jars more useful. For example, there are lids that you can screw onto the mason jar where you put a straw through the hole to make it into a drinking container. And then the other thing I saw, which is interesting, is that the lid from many Parmesan cheese containers is actually the exact same size as a mason jar lid, and so you can screw it onto a mason jar lid and it can then be a shaker for things like baking powder for you to put in your cleaning basket. Now, another thing that this is kind of obvious, but it didn't occur to me right off the bat, which is that there are many food items that we can make in our kitchens in glass jars. And if we make it at home in these glass jars, we can save buying the item in plastic. And we can also save money in most cases. So, of course, I was thinking about canning and also for storing cool water in the fridge. But there are many other ideas as well, such as salads. For example, I read that lettuce keeps longer if you make pre-made salads and store it in mason jars, which is also great for packing a lunch, which also reduces waste. We can make our own homemade vanilla, orange, and lemon extract. And at least where I live, most of those come in little plastic bottles. We can make apple cider vinegar from apple peelings, which is a great use. I mean, I compost my apple peelings, but why not also make this? We can make sprouts, which I love sprouts, but they always go bad super fast. So it would be great to just grow them at home. I could make kombucha or other fermented items. This is kind of an in thing right now. I haven't really tried it, but I'm very keen. And then elderflower cordial. This sounds like a thing from Anne of Green Gables, but it sounds really fun and you could make it yourself. And then I could also make yogurt cheese or labne because this is made from yogurt and you put it in cheesecloth and you can just hang it from inside a glass jar and then you have like cheese that you don't have to buy in plastic. It's so great. There are also many fun gifts that you can put in recycled glass jars. The obvious ones you probably have received before are like all the ingredients to make a soup or all the ingredients to make a batch of cookies. And these are always popular teacher gifts. I mean, I think it's just such a fantastic gift to receive homemade jam or relishes made from ingredients that your friend picked, being handmade for you from local ingredients. Now, mostly I've talked about kind of serious uses of glass jars in your home, but glass jars can also be a fun decorative item. I saw a candy jar craft, which involved gluing recycled wooden candlesticks or spindles to a jar full of candies. Now, I don't tend to have candies lying around in my house, but some people do. And you could also put in seasonally appropriate candies as part of your seasonal decor. Now, let's talk about ways to reuse glass bottles and jars outside in your yard or on your patio. Now, some folks make torches from glass bottles and they put in citronella torch fuel and they make a wick from a cotton rope. And this is a great way to repel insects. In the southern United States, there is a tradition called a bottle tree, and this involves a metal tree where the bottles are slid onto the branches so that they are facing downward. And usually these are colorful bottles, not just transparent ones, but blue and red, all the bottles that you might be a little bit sad to put in the recycling bin because they are so beautiful. Now, sometimes the trees are made from a tall post where people embed thick nails or rebar stakes and they stick out like branches. And now they're so popular that you can even buy the metal base for a bottle tree on websites like gardeners.com, or you could find a local artisan who does welding and they can make one for you. And you just search under the category of decorative garden stakes, where stake is spelled S-T-A-K-E. I even saw a whole Christmas tree made from green recycled bottles. And I did an episode a while ago on alternative Christmas trees, and this would definitely be one that would go in that category. Now, I have a special memory from my teenager years that involves walking in the winter on a winter hike through a trail of snow. Along the trail, there were all these beautiful luminaria. Now, luminaria are just little lanterns and they can be made from lots of things. But from glass jars, that's a great one because you could put actual candles in there and you don't have to use the electric ones. And I think if you wanted to make a special memory for someone, you could collect glass jars and you could surprise them with a luminaria lit trail. I think that is the first romance tip that I have ever given on this podcast, but hopefully not the last. So next, I will share ideas for crafts that you can make with glass bottles and jars that involve painting. You can give your less colorful glass jars and bottles a colorful makeover by swirling paint inside the jar. And I will link to the blog Color Me Happy. She takes jars and she makes them into adorable designs, like she makes school supply themed jars for teacher gifts that look like a box of crayons or a calculator. And then there's also a lot of crafts right now that are very popular on Pinterest related to Halloween, where you put a silhouette of a spooky creature and you backlight it with candles inside the glass jar. You can also paint clear glass to turn it into a colorful glass using glass paint, and I will link to a tutorial on that. And some people use glass in their decor, but this allows them to upgrade it and match it more closely to their decor or add a pop of color. Now, I mentioned creative reuse artist Danny Seo back in the episode on recycling mattresses and box springs. He inspired me to take apart a mattress and box spring and see if I could get it down to its component parts. And I've been following his work for many decades. So he has a tutorial where he uses puffy paint to put little circular dabs on a glass bottle, and then he paints over the whole bottle, and he calls it sea urchin inspired glassware. And actually, you can do this on recycled metal cans as well. And Danny uses puffy paints to add that texture, but Chris Bordessa from the blog Attainable Sustainable, she doesn't paint over the puffy paint. She uses different colors of puffy paint to make designs on recycled glass jars, and they look like little mosaics. And this seems like a really great, simple craft that is very accessible and fun. Now, my son did a similar craft at his Harry Potter after school club. They were pretending that they were in potions class, and they took glue guns to make random designs on recycled glass bottles, and then they painted over the drips with metallic paint, so it made awesome looking potions bottles. And this can also be done with plastic bottles like vitamin bottles and other things like that. So I have one more craft that involves painting bottles and jars, and that is that you can take a paper napkin with a design that you like, or even scraps of tissue paper, and you can paint it onto the surface of a glass bottle or jar with Mod Podge or diluted glue. And this is called decoupage, and it works surprisingly well. It looks like the napkin is really part of the glass. It looks really cool. So the next crafts I'm going to talk about involve cutting and melting glass bottles and jars. So you can see I started the podcast talking about things where you don't have to change the jars, but it's getting more and more invasive now. We did painting, and now we're like actually changing the shape of the jar. Now, there are tutorials that say that you can cut glass bottles and jars with string and acetone. And I haven't tried this, but I have heard from people that it mostly doesn't work well. It can leave a jagged edge. Most artists that do this type of work recommend a basic bottle cutting tool, and these are not very expensive. They sell for like $20 to $40 American, and making crafts from bottles and jars can be a great craft business for someone who likes to do the same steps over and over with a lot of precision. I think the resulting work has a very high value perception from the customer. It has a very modern aesthetic that's really popular right now. And I think I would really like to learn this skill because I love the projects that you can make. My favorite designs are a candle holder that involves cutting off the bottom of the wine bottle and then placing it over a candle. And so the candle gets its oxygen still through the bottleneck, but the bottle protects the candle from getting blown out. It's like a really cool looking lantern. It can be combined with reclaimed wood. And then I love the drinking glasses where they take these really beautifully designed soda bottles and other bottles and just cut off the bottleneck to make it a drinking glass. I love garden cloche or terrariums. These are like little mini greenhouses. You take a really wide, transparent glass bottle, like maybe one used for apple cider, and you cut off the bottom, and then these can be placed over baby plants, or they can put on a plate that has a terrarium filled with items inside. I saw a really cool design for a clothes hook, which has to be seen to believe. So you have to go to the website on Trashmagination to see it. And then I saw a stained glass window made from the circular bottoms of glass bottles. Now, I have been holding off on purchasing a bottle cutter because I already have too many creative reuse projects on the go, and I am quite nervous about cutting myself because I tend to hurt myself. There are gloves made from Kevlar, which I could wear while handling the glass, so I may get there at some point. Now, the next craft is even more invasive than cutting the bottle and involves melting the bottle. It is called bottle slumping. And it is a bigger investment because it's made with a kiln. Now, you may have seen glass bottles that look like they've been melted until they are flat, and they can be used as serving platters. And I have one made from a bottle that used to look like a fish. Now it looks like a flattened fish. It looks really cool. It was one of the first creative reuse items I bought as a very young person because I thought it looked so cool. So it involves putting the bottle in an electric glass kiln, which you probably don't want to go buy one of those, but maybe you could find one at your community center. And you could also contact your local stained glass supply stores, and they may have suggestions on that. So if you have these beautiful, colorful glass jars and bottles and you are not keen to reuse them all, you're generating too many of them, you can find local artists who would love to have them. And I find the best way to find those types of artists is a couple things. One is you could find people who make glass countertops. And I follow a whole bunch of them. You can check them out by just searching under glass countertop in your area, and you'd be surprised, especially recycled glass countertop. And you'll find companies, I know they especially love blue bottles. Bombay Sapphire Aqua blue bottles are really, I see them talk about it all the time. I supported a cool company called Evolution Glass located in Charlottesville, Virginia, when they had their Kickstarter, because they have a lot of companies embed bits of glass into their countertop, but they have a method of melting the glass into a solid, really cool texture looking thing. So I supported them because I thought they were doing something pretty innovative. And if you're looking for the glass artists I follow, I have a page on my website called My World Tour Plan, where I list all the creative reuse artists that I would love to visit. Now, You might find that there are glass artists right in your neighborhood. I had that experience in my local Buy Nothing group. This guy named Luis, he requested glass jars to make poured candles. And I had saved a bunch of jars. I really like those Bon Maman jam bottles because of the flat sides. And he took the jars and he made candles for a charity fundraiser, which I thought was awesome. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about today are bottle houses. This is really fun for a vacation. I had never heard of them, and now I want to look for them everywhere. So you just do a search on the term glass bottle houses and see if there's any near you. I found some, bottle houses in Prince Edward Island, which would be fun. That's close to where I grew up. And then the Tom Kelly bottle houses in Nevada. In fact, it's a whole ghost town of bottle houses. And then Carrie's Desert Bottle House, which is actually an Airbnb made of recycled bottles. Wouldn't that be cool to stay there? So thank you so much for listening. I always love to hear about your creative reuse projects. Please let me know at trashmagination@gmail.com. I gathered today's ideas on a Pinterest board, and you can get the link to that in the show notes. A few other announcements. I'm still looking for broken camping tents. These can be broken or moldy. I have ideas for ways to reuse both the poles and the nylon or canvas. And I'm also looking for colorful plastic bottles like shampoo bottles. And you can check out trashmagination.com to get all the information about that project. Also, I had an idea to share some art exhibit news from some of my favorite creative reuse artists in case you happen to live where their exhibits are being held, because then you could go and you could take pictures and I could vicariously enjoy the exhibits through you. I'm just going to mention 4 of my favorite artists who have really great exhibits right now. In Michigan, there is an exhibit by Michelle Stitzline called Industrial Nature at the Saugatuck Center for the Arts. And she made really cool plants and woven tapestries from garden hoses. And that exhibit ends next week, so you got to get over there and let me know how it is. And then another of my favorite artists is Aurora Robson. She has a whole bunch of exhibits happening right now. One in West Nyack, New York, one at the Arboretum at Penn State University, and one at a gallery in Omaha, Nebraska. And I just love her plastic sculptures. You got to check it out. The ones in New York and Pennsylvania light up at night with solar lights, which is pretty cool. Sayaka Gans has an exhibit opening in North Carolina Arboretum in Asheville on September 22nd. The exhibit's called Reclaimed Creations. She makes giant animals from plastic trash. I think I will be going to Asheville this fall to see it because that is just super cool that it's close enough that I could actually see it. And then Thomas Dambo, you know I love his giant trolls that he builds from recycled wooden pallets, and he's got a whole troll hunt at the Morton Arboretum near Chicago, and he's just built a new troll in Breckenridge, Colorado. If you know about any creative reuse themed art exhibits in your community, please let me know because I love learning about new artists, and maybe I'll come visit your town. Be sure to share whatever inspired you in today's podcast with your friends and family. And this will let more people know about this podcast, and hopefully more people will subscribe and they will get their creative reuse pep talks. Until next time, may you see glass bottles and jars as a source of art in your life.